Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is warm and safe. Tough morning to go out driving. Just came back from shul. The streets aren't even plowed yet, so be careful if you have to go out. Okay, this morning's discussion, and it's part of our efforts in general to try to understand things through the prism of halacha. So I wanted to talk about the status of Uber. And it's generic. I mean, Lyft also falls into that category. In terms of a halakhic perspective on how the operation works. Basically, Uber sets a fee and takes a percentage. And they also regulate who drives. And they also have the ability to deactivate accounts of drivers, excuse me, who don't follow their rules and regulations. And this raises a whole bunch of issues from a halakhic perspective. For example, in many cities, New York, for example, taxis are strictly regulated by the city. Taxi owners pay a hefty license fee in order to pick up passengers. And most taxi drivers are opposed to Uber because it's asagas gvul. It's taking away, it's cutting into their parnasa. Is that a legitimate claim? That's number one. Number two, are Uber drivers considered employees or contractors? Makes a big difference. In California, for example, Uber drivers are considered employees, which means that Uber has to pay for the driver's gas, wear and tear in the car, etc. In most Jersey, it's not that way. The Uber drivers are considered contractors, not workers. So that's also an issue to discuss. Are employees of Uber contractors or employees, and what is the practical difference? Again, from a halakhic perspective, and also, just as a side issue, or perhaps not necessarily a side issue, if a woman is due to give birth and preparing for the possibility of having to go to the hospital on Shabbos, is the best way to get to the hospital on Shabbos is with an Uber, where it's all paid up in advance, and there's the minimal violation of Chilul Shabbos there. So these are a whole bunch of issues that come up. So let's talk about Hasagas Gvul first of all. Hasagas Gvul simply means if you are a resident of a community and you are operating a business, another person from out of town or another person even in town can't necessarily come in and open the same business if the town can't support two businesses, because essentially you're taking away from that person's parnasa. The Gemara says that someone lives in a mavui, in a courtyard, and he has a business in that courtyard. He can prevent another person from opening the same type of business in that courtyard under the category of hasagas gevul. Similarly, the Gemara says if you are a fisherman, you can't fish in the same area where another guy's fishing. There's a whole discussion there in terms of what are the implications of hasagas gevul. Gemara has some fascinating discussions on that. There's a discussion, for example, if you have two similar stores, and one shopkeeper gives out candy to get them to come into his store to buy stuff. Is it permissible or is it not permissible? It's machlokas, Rabbi Huda and Chachamim, because that might be an unfair advantage that somebody's taking over another store in terms of competition. Again, price wars, all these things fit into hasagas gevul. And unfortunately, it's not fully resolved in terms of the halacha, in terms of hasagas gevul, because, for example, the RCBC has determined that hasagas gevul doesn't apply today in Bergen County, which allowed them to not stop certain stores from opening up, which drove other stores out of business. This happened a number of times in Bergen County, where you had small operations running very, very successfully, and then a big operation comes in, a big store comes in, and puts them out of business. It's happened several times, and the RCBC, unfortunately, in my opinion, ruled that Hasagas Gevul doesn't apply because the community is sufficiently large to support multiple stores, which we know Teaneck and the surrounding areas can support. However, if you have a store providing a certain, a butcher store or a restaurant providing a certain service, and then a better funded or a bigger operation comes in and can afford to charge lower prices, that puts a small guy out of business. And this happens several times. And again, this is an ongoing discussion. There's also, and in both of these cases that I'm referring to in Teaneck, the people that came in were not residents of Teaneck. They were outsiders that came in, which also is a consideration of the halacha. The Mordechai quotes Rabbi Tam that an outsider can come in if he pays taxes, as opposed to actually moving here. Because you don't want, again, you try to do whatever you can to protect people's businesses. To what extent an outside vendor can benefit local people, that's a separate discussion. In the Gemara, many Rishonim hold that a local shopkeeper can prevent outsiders from coming in because of Hasagas Gevul. So here, the taxi drivers in any city are up in arms against Lyft and against Uber because it's the different system. Anybody can call them, and their rates perhaps are a little bit lower, and it puts them out of business because an Uber driver doesn't have to pay the exorbitant fees and licensing that a taxi driver has to pay. There are a limited number in New York City, a limited number of medallions that are sold to give you the right to sell to operate a taxi, and they're very, very expensive. And there's a lot of issues in terms of people getting ripped off in terms of how much money they have to pay. But in any event, an Uber driver just signs up with Uber. Again, in California, he's considered an employee, so the company has to pay his expenses. But every place else, they're more like contractors, and they get a fee based on distance for every customer that they pick up. Okay. There's a machlokas, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah concerning outsiders coming in and being able to operate a business. In terms of competition. So in terms of Hasagas Gevul, I don't want to get too deep into that, but basically it is an issue. Hasagas Gevul is an issue. Are the Uber drivers who live locally, in almost all cases, are they competing with the taxi driver, or is the Uber company the competitor of the taxi owners? That's an interesting question. And the Mefarshim go off in different directions. Let me focus now about a bigger issue as to whether or not Uber drivers are considered a poel or a kablon. Are they considered an employee or a contractor? And there are a number of differences. For example, a poel can quit his job in the middle of the day, theoretically, because you're not slaves. If a person if a person can't quit a salaried job, that's tantamount to slavery, and we're only slaves to Hashem. So that's one difference. Rabbi Tam looks at it differently in Tosfos, and he says that the difference between a poel and a kablon is that a poel, again, can back out of a deal, but a kablon cannot back out. If I am a contractor and I say I will get paid for the job, and I will do this job for you. Once I make a contract to do a job, I cannot back out. That's the difference between a kablon. There are other definitions as well. For example, If you have to work during specific hours, you're a poel. You work a 9 to 5 job, you are a poel. You are a worker. Whereas if you can set your own time schedule and you're doing it by the job, not by the hour, then you are considered a kablon, a contractor. And most Uber drivers pretty much set their own hours. They work when they want to work. You don't have to answer every call that comes in. So they, from that perspective, they are considered a kablon, and then Uber would not have to pay for their expenses. And the Truma Sedeshen also agrees with that. Again, there are a lot of Rishon and Achronim. Interesting. A chazan, for example, is considered a kablon, not a poel, because he's hired for an entire season or for an entire yontif. Even if he gets paid on a regular basis, nevertheless, he can't really work his own hours, and he can only perform his job during certain times when davening takes place. But he is considered a kablon according to some mefarshim. According to U.S. labor law, this is fascinating. A salaried employee gets paid for the job that he does, not for the hours that he works. So if you're a store manager, for example, you must be in the store during the hours of operation. But if it requires additional time, you still have to be there, even though you're not getting paid for it. And according to some, that would make you a poel and not a kablon. But if you're getting paid for the job as opposed to the hours, you might be considered. So it's not clear. Uber, basically, from a halakhic perspective, is considered a gray area because the driver gets paid based on distance, and the price of the trip is fixed before the kinyan, the agreement takes place. And you can argue both ways, whether he's a poel or a kablon. In most situations, again, it's not clear. You can't really quit in the middle of the job. So the halakhic question is: an Uber driver a poel or a kablon? I would say the majority of poskim would hold that he is a kablon, but there are some aspects of his job that make him into a poel. And if that's the case, then the company would have to pay for his expenses. But obviously, it doesn't work out that way. In practical terms, an Uber driver or a Lyft driver is considered a contractor since they pretty much make their own hours, and since they pick when to drive, when not to drive. Okay. So the bottom line is that we don't know. It's not clear, although the consensus would probably make them into a kablon and not a poel. Let's talk about taking an Uber to the hospital on Shabbos. And here we run into a whole bunch of other issues. The easiest thing to do, obviously, if you have a pregnant woman who may have to deliver on Shabbos, and you have a non-Jewish neighbor, for that non-Jewish neighbor to, who's assuming he's willing to do this, to take her to the hospital on Shabbos. Other alternative is through Uber, as long as you have a non-Jewish driver. You've arranged it for all, and the only malacha that you're doing basically is pushing 2 buttons on a smartphone to call Uber. You already made the arrangements in advance. And there are even some who would say that a smartphone on Shabbos is, because it's not, it could be grama, not necessarily an actual malacha, so that there may be heterim there as well. But the preferable is a neighbor. Number 2 would be Uber. And that would seem to be the best way to do it. That brings us to a whole other discussion as to whether a woman who is in labor is considered sakonos nefashos, and that's a whole separate issue. We do know that giving birth is sakonos nefashos, but being in labor may not necessarily fall into that category, which may or may not put the woman into a category of chol sheyesh bo sakana. When she begins to have contractions, is that sufficient to violate Shabbos? According to Rov Deos, they would probably say yes, but we do try to minimize what a person does. If her husband drives her to the hospital on Shabbos, which he has every right and halachically permissible to do, the question is, once you get to the hospital, what do you do with the car then? She's there. Is there any heter to turn off the car, to park the car? Because you've accomplished, and certainly you can't come home after. But there are issues when you drive to the hospital. It's fine. Once you get there, it's not so simple.
Rabbi,
yes.
A question. This is not halachic. This is probably just American something. You said if you had a non-Jewish neighbor, the woman thinks she might go into labor on Shabbos, so she talks to her non-Jewish neighbor, like, if I send my husband to knock on your door, that means you have to please take me to the hospital. Or you said a non-Jewish driver, Uber. I've never ordered an Uber in my life. Are you permitted to
no
driver?
You can't specify you want a non-Jewish driver.
So that,
I mean, I've taken Uber many times. I have yet to have a Jewish driver, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. I'm sure they do. Most of the cases, they are immigrants from different places who are trying to make a few extra bucks. I know in Fairlawn, that's certainly the case when I go into the airport. So again, the best thing is a non-Jewish neighbor if you have one. Calling Uber is number two, to rely on perhaps the notion of rove, that the majority of drivers may not be Jewish. It's a tricky question. It's a tricky question. Again, pikuach nefesh on Shabbos is a whole separate discussion. Everybody agrees that pikuach nefesh is doche Shabbos, that you can violate Shabbos for a person who is in serious pikuach nefesh. Does labor constitute pikuach nefesh? That's not so clear. Delivery is. Labor may not be. But we try to be makil as much as possible. And there are poskim who favor Uber. There are those who don't. If you're in a life-threatening situation, obviously you do whatever you have to do. The whole question is which malachos you can do on Shabbos, which you're going to try not to violate on Shabbos. It's a very sticky question, and it gets into much too much detail for us to go into right now. But of all the options available, other than the non-Jewish neighbor, Uber would probably be the best, or even a car service, same type, if you've arranged it in advance, to take you to shop, and it's all paid for in advance. It's a question, there are a lot of, this is a separate topic all by itself. If a person, God forbid, has an accident on Shabbos, or a person is ill on Shabbos, and he has to go to the hospital on Shabbos, and you call Hatzalah, or you call the Fairlawn ambulance service, can another person go with him in the ambulance on Shabbos, or her? Now, you could, if it's necessary to calm the person down, fine. Just to go along for the ride to get to the hospital is not so simple. So there are a Shabbos is a very important area for people to study or to ask a shayla in advance. If a chola needs a candle, you light a candle. There's a famous story about, I think it was Reb Chaim. Somebody saw him one day running through the streets in Brisk, holding a candle without a yarmulke on his head. The town was crazy. What's going on? The rabbi is running on Shabbos with a candle, no yarmulke. He had heard that a woman was in labor giving birth, and the doctor needed a candle to see what was going on. And so he took the candle, he lit it, he ran to the woman's house, and in running, his yarmulke came off. But he didn't stop, put his yarmulke back on again, because that's how important it is, for sakanos nefashos to put off Shabbos. And dafka, it was the town rabbi that did it. If there's a need to be machal Shabbos to save a life, you don't say let somebody else do it. The rabbi himself should do it to show that this is not only permissible, but it's advisable to do this. And it's a teaching opportunity. It's a teaching opportunity. So all these things, the whole purpose of this discussion is to indicate that everything that we do, even the mundane task of calling Uber to go to the airport, involves halakhic considerations. Everything can be viewed through a halakhic prism. Whether the driver is considered a contractor, whether he's considered a worker, has ramifications, and also in terms of the issues for Shabbos. So I just wanted to raise those issues, that we should think about these things, and everything that we do can be viewed from that perspective. That's what I wanted to share with you this morning on this beautiful snowy day. Any questions, comments? Good. Okay. So hopefully we shouldn't be in a position of having to call a car on Shabbos. We're healthy. And have a wonderful day and stay safe today.
It's like, Wally?
Yes.
Yeah. So what's your opinion on Amazon as far as taking away business from locals?
It's the same question. It's the same question. Amazon is putting a lot of mom and pop operations out of business. However, and not the mom and pop, but the big stores are also feeling hurt by Amazon. But if you look carefully, a lot of smaller stores are doing their selling through Amazon. So on the one hand, it might be putting some people out of business. On the other hand, it's an opportunity for many small businesses to get their products sold to a larger audience. Amazon has its own products that it sells, but if you look carefully, Amazon sells products from a lot of small people. When you go online to order something, they give you many, many different options, and some of it comes from small shop owners who sell their products through Amazon.
Where the navel's on, there's no price.
What's that, Mildy? I didn't hear the question.
I don't think it was a question.
Okay, so Amazon is a double-edged sword. It for sure it puts a lot of small businesses at risk, but by the same token, many small businesses sell their products through Amazon. I'll give you an example. I wanted to order a gartel for somebody as a gift. Okay, and I was away at the time, so I went on Amazon, and I was able to order a gartel on Amazon because it contracted with a small Judaica store someplace in Chicago, wherever it was, to provide religious articles. So that guy made a sale. I mean, he paid a percentage to Amazon, I'm sure, but I was able to order a gartel through Amazon.
Yeah, I bought tzitzis on Amazon.
There you go. You can buy tzitzis on Amazon. You can buy Hanukkah lamps, oil lamps. You can buy a lot of things. So it's a double-edged sword. Amazon is a classic case that the Gemara is talking about of an outsider coming into a local community to open up a business. That's the classic example. Now, if they had only their own products to sell, then halachically it might be a problem. But they're not just the attraction of Amazon is that they get products from all over the world, literally.
Right.
It's a giant supermarket. So if they don't have it, they'll contract with somebody who does.
Okay.
It has changed the whole purchasing system in America, the world for that matter. Anything else?